Okay, welcome to September 6, 2016 special meeting. Can I have the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Can you stand? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so we will go, any announcements from the board? Any announcements? Okay. So we'll go straight into public comment. Any item of interest to the public that is within subject matter jurisdiction of the board and is not posted in the consent or regular agendas may be addressed during the public comment period. California law prohibits the board from taking action on any matter which is not posted on the agenda unless it is determined to be an emergency by the board of supervisors. If public comment is completed before the 30-minute allotted time period, the board may immediately move to the regular agenda. If public comment is not completed during the allotted time period, it will be continued at the conclusion of the consent agenda in order to provide an opportunity for the remainder of the comments to be heard. So we will have a 3-minute public comment period.
Chair, before we start, is Supervisor Kearney going to be joining us?
Yeah, Supervisor Kearney contacted me earlier, said that right around 3 o'clock this morning he's starting to get sick, so he will not attend today.
Thank you.
Okay. How many minutes?
3.
Including foreplay.
It's up to you.
Okay, there we go. First off, I have to thank 2 people that are in the back today, and that is our sheriff and Jim, who both did me a favor on Friday without knowing. They went to your ballot and brought in some information that was needed according to you. So, could you please thank you? It's not a thank you, but it's kind of a, yeah. Not a great sound. Next, I have to thank Megan, County Council. She worked on the weekend and answered an email that I sent out. And I don't like anybody working on the weekend, especially when they have family. It kind of irks me that somebody would feel that they would need to do that. I'm very much a person that believes in the best profits come from those closest to you, not from monetary gain. So I have a hat from you, and I got this hat down in Louisiana. And as this passes to each board member, please read the back of it, and of course a candy bar. Okay. Next, I have something for each of the board members, including Steve, who's not here. You can just save that for him and give it to him at some other time. In my long, illustrious career, I used to stop by the Jelly Belly plant, and I used to buy little bags of Jelly Belly, and I'd use this these Jelly Belly bags to get in offices where I shouldn't be. What I'd do is hand it to the secretary or some other person who was in charge of access, and say, can I please talk to your boss, person in charge? Can you please help me with this or that? And it worked wonders. But as I got older, I found that just giving them out to say thank you, and I really do have to say thank you to you folks.
30 seconds.
I thank you for telling me 30 seconds. I really do have to say thank you. Recently, I received 4 signposts with signs for a dangerous part of a road that's in front of my property. This happened in 2.5 weeks after I made the request. There was already a road study done, and we're not going to talk about the details of this, but there were several accidents down there, and it's really helping the community. And I really have to thank the board for being here, and Cliff Edson, of course, is our board chair. So each of you received a jelly bellies. Megan makes out like a band today. Cat, jelly bellies, and candy bars. So there we go. Thank you very much. I hope you have a fruitful meeting. I understand there's something very important. And enjoy.
Okay, any other public comments?
Good afternoon. House of Gallup Taxpayer Association. I sent you an email on a issue that's coming up that could affect our local economy. And this is a state proposal for changing the way of taxation for our highways from a gas tax, which is pretty fair, to a mile tax, which could have some disastrous consequences and all kinds of additional expenses. And what this would mean is that by having a mile tax, an inexpensive little car would pay the same tax per mile than a big heavy-duty truck. The effect of this would be to depress the amount of traffic for the little cars, like vacationers coming up here. And we could increase the amount of trucking, except that with our economy being depressed by driving people away from here that have cars, we would have less goods and services and less need for trucks. So it's a lose-lose situation. And our Taxpayer Association would like to encourage you to review this and contact our state representatives and CCOG to express your opposition to it if that is your decision. Thank you.
Okay. Any other public comments? All right. We'll move on to our regular agenda.
Item 1 is from the Administrative Office to provide staff direction regarding the future structure of the Office of Emergency Services.
At the August 23rd board meeting, the board directed staff to schedule a study session in order to look at the future structure of the Office of Emergency Services. OES is responsible for response, recovery, planning, and training for major disasters and emergencies, and it requires specialized training and knowledge to successfully run an OES. As I had mentioned at that time, the Administrative Office and the Sheriff's Office met on August 5th for some initial discussions regarding steps needed to bring a comprehensive plan and recommendations to the board. The Sheriff's Office was going to research other counties of similar size or larger that have a successful record of OES and determine what best practices can be applied to Calaveras County to support and enhance our Office of Emergency Services. We know that different counties have different structures for their OES departments. Some are standalone departments, some reside under the Administrative Office, and some, like currently in Calaveras County, they reside under the Sheriff's Office. Basically, eventually we'll have to modify staff size and makeup and probably get additional equipment as resources allow. Given the short time since that meeting, I don't believe that the Sheriff's Office has had a significant opportunity to do all the required research that they're planning on doing. However, they do have a presentation to make today and updating where they are.
Good afternoon, Board. Sheriff DiBasilio. I just want to reiterate what we've spoke about offline, some of us in the past, is that I believe that OES needs to stay within the Sheriff's Department. I think we have the ability to do the job that needs to be done. We were doing it once before. Captain Macedo has a little presentation to kind of give you a little history of where OES started and within the Sheriff's Department and where it's going. We have, as Shirley talked about, started contacting other counties to see what they're doing so that we can bring a comprehensive plan back to you folks and not just give you an A and a B, maybe an A, B, and a C so that you have some options to see where we'd like to see OES go. So I'll let Captain Macedo. He just left.
He just ditched the sheriff.
Did he ditch me? Okay, well, that's okay. Oh.
Good afternoon, Jim Macedo, Sheriff's Office. I just have two quick slides. These are copies. The organizational chart you see up before you now is our old organizational chart, and that's where the Office of Emergency Services was when we were fully staffed and budgeted prior to the recession. You'll notice at the top of the chart is the sheriff at one point in time. It says operations captain, but it was a special operations captain. There was a special operations lieutenant, an Office of Emergency Services sergeant, a deputy sheriff. There was a sheriff services tech, and then off to the right there were two hazardous material Office of Emergency Services technicians. At that point in time, the budget was significantly different. It was, as I mentioned, prior to the recession, but it was also at a time when grants were much more easy to come by, and grants didn't have the same commitments and requirements that they do now. A lot of the grants that they had received at that time were post 9/11 Homeland Security type grants, and I think the government was, for lack of a better term, a little looser in the grant business as far as requirements back then, so we were able to obtain some grants that were used as matching funds for revenue for the Office of Emergency Services, and at that time it paid for a lot of equipment. A lot of that funding went towards hazardous materials, and some of it did go towards hazardous materials response. And then some of it did go into facilities and staffing for that division. So at the time, the Office of Emergency Services was a standalone division that operated out of the airport, the building that the Sheriff's Office has at the airport, and it involved a third captain. At that time, the Sheriff's Office had three captains, and he was in charge of that particular division of the Sheriff's Office. I'm going to switch slides for you real quick. The next slide represents where we are at today. We have an Office of Emergency Services lieutenant who reports to the sheriff, and we have an Office of Emergency Services sergeant who reports to that lieutenant, and one sheriff services tech. And you'll notice an asterisk next to all three of those folks because they're all operating part-time. So as our budget shrank, people had to assume more responsibilities and more hats. To give you an idea, the Office of Emergency Services lieutenant is also responsible for dispatch, court security, communications, the fleet, and I'm sure I'm forgetting a few other things. The sergeant, Office of Emergency Services sergeant, is responsible for the same three things. The Sheriff Services Tech is also responsible for a portion of the same three things, and she's also handles most of the Sheriff's Office's purchasing, and she does payroll as well. So they're not split into halves, not necessarily split into quarters. There's, in some cases, depending on the day, they're doing 5, 6, 7 different types of assignments.
Yes. We also have PIO, right?
The Public Information Officer is not within the Special Operations Division and not in that part of the organizational chart or that division. The PIO is under the Operations Division, which is my division. because the largest demand for that relates to criminal activity and reporting out information that comes out of our operations division, which is patrol and investigations. They will step in and help out with things, but they're merely relaying information that's taken from the Special Operations Division, Lieutenant and Sergeant, and relaying that out to the public. So to answer your question, we have a part-time PIO that's in the Operations Division, and if you just bear with me, he is also our Field Training Officer Sergeant, our Administrative Sergeant, handles most of the department's initial personnel complaints, and he basically introduces all new employees to our facility and our equipment. So he's tasked out with several jobs as well. Sorry, that's a long answer for a short question. So at this point in time, I mean, I could go into a significant bit of history, but I don't want to go there if that's not what the board would like to hear about. I think hopefully we have sufficient staff here to answer any questions that may come up. The sheriff mentioned that we're doing some research with other entities, and that is a fact. We've reached out to some of those folks. We're going to meet with them. What we're trying to do is meet with Office of Emergency Services divisions that are county divisions that run well, that specifically deal with fires, because that has been our biggest impact. However, for those of you that were here in '97, we had flood issues, and there's also some other responsibilities that the board is familiar with, such as emergency operating plans. There's pandemic flu stuff that the Office of Emergency Services needs to contend with, and other public health related emergencies. And I can tell you, we did brief previous boards as well as this board as our funding structure kept getting reduced with the 17.5% cut, 17.5% cut, 10% cut, that the staffing was going to compress and it was going to affect our ability to operate as we move forward. I can tell you that as far as the Butte fire goes, that was probably the largest event we've had to handle, and staff in the sheriff's office did the best they could do, and in some cases staff did an excellent job. Are there areas for improvement? I think absolutely, but considering the limited staff we had at that time, I think they did an excellent job. I'll take any questions.
I just have some basic primer questions for the public in general, and just so we're all on the same board of what we're talking about. First, who is the current part-time OES lieutenant?
That is Lieutenant Dennis Hubbard.
Okay. And then, so if you describe, just the basics of what OES does, and, is there like a code that lays out what OES is supposed to do, et cetera, kind of just a basic background, just so we all know what we're talking about.
Sure, and I'll do the best I can. I may bring Dennis up. So the Sheriff's Office has a policy for Office of Emergency Services. It's a departmental policy. And within that policy, it lays out a structure and some responsibilities. The best way to look at the Office of Emergency Services in Calaveras County is we act as a manager and coordinator for all of the first responders within the county. That includes fire and EMS. Those communications and the managing of that is utilized through a series of meetings that come up. Some of the meetings are quarterly, some of them are annually. It just kind of depends on which particular issue they're talking about. When we have a major event, we convene the MAC. That MAC is also convened ahead of certain seasonal changes that affect floods, fires, and what have you, and those are known as pre-planning meetings. Depending on what type of incident we're meeting on, the OES sheriff's representative usually chairs the meeting. However, if that meeting is heavily fire-driven, even though they're chairing the meeting, fire is going to take the bulk of the presentation. One way to look at it, and we coordinate the emergency response essentially, but that multi-agency working group, the sheriff's office cannot be experts in things such as power or public health issues. So it really depends on the type of meeting. We also coordinate funding that comes in from the federal government. We coordinate meetings and the budget as it relates to that. There's a group of public safety professionals from fire, EMS, public health, sheriff's office, police department that meet to discuss funding annually. And then based upon the amount of money that those groups basically, for lack of a better term, apply with a project with which they want to spend certain amounts of funds on, and then the sheriff's office brings those funds in and allocates those out through the county for those projects. Most of those are reimbursable. It's not something where we get to just spend freely or money that's given to us by the government. In a nutshell, Dennis, is there anything you'd like to add?
If I could add just a few things. An OES department, a robust one, also is responsible for training and planning in event of the emergencies. So training department head staff as to their roles. I know a long time ago when police staff, there were tabletop exercises to practice what was going on. And then there's this time around, I think it's the first time we've really been in the recovery mode. So OES oversees a fully staffed functioning, and not saying that they handled the response appropriately and everything else, but as we moved into recovery, it came away from and out of the OES department and more to the county departments. So in looking going forward, and this is what Captain Macedo was talking about, looking at other counties and how they do it, because they a lot of them do all those components: recovery, response, recovery, training, and planning. And so really it's depending on how those look, what are sworn personnel, what are non-sworn personnel, and those are the things that they're researching and hope to bring back to the board, if I'm correct.
Yes, we do work with citizens groups as well. There's some citizen groups that handle and volunteer, as well as Red Cross and other entities outside of your normal government structure. And yeah, to be more clear, when we reach out to the other agencies that we not only have been told do the Office of Emergency Services thing very well, we're going to look at their structure, their equipment, their staffing, their operations, compare that to our own, and then we will probably try and pair that to what Calaveras County needs. And at that point in time, we will probably show up back before the board in a second study session and provide the board with some options based upon what we've seen and found. Obviously, there's a price tag to that, and that's something we haven't discussed yet, but we wanted to put together what we needed staffing-wise first and then attach a cost to it, staffing and equipment-wise, then attach a cost to it, and then we would return to the board. I do want to be clear, though, that we're going to look at some rural counties and that are the same size, but in order to do this right, we are going to have to look at some larger counties that have a lot of experience with fire and evacuations and recovery and issues. I know after last year we have a lot of experience, but I think it's important to note that this is pretty routine in Southern California. Their fires burn well into even December, and we know some agencies along the coast down there that deal with the Office of Emergency Service as well, and they have kind of a robust structure. We've already reached out to a couple of them, as well as some in the North State that have had some experience with catastrophic fires and other flooding issues. So at this time, it's premature for us to come in and say, this is what we need, but we are and have been working towards that direction. We didn't want to leave also during fire season and try and reinvent the wheel during the middle of fire season. So for a timetable, we're probably not going to be reporting back until towards the end of October.
Thanks for that background. Appreciate it.
Any other questions?
I have some. So when you talk about that organization chart before, how it used to be,
Yes.
what did you think about it, how it used to be? Was it efficient?
That's
Did it meet all the needs?
That's a really interesting question. And when we've spoken about this, there were some things that worked really well with that other organizational chart, but there were some things that worked really bad. And we were trying to determine if it dealt, the portions that didn't work so well, if it dealt with the staffing portion of it. Times were different back then. I think it's important to note we had a heavy hazardous materials workload during that time. We were doing a lot of drug labs. during that time. So those 2 hazardous materials technicians were very busy responding to essentially drug labs. There were other hazardous material spills. So there were some things that worked really well, and obviously when you have more staff to assign to emergencies, things seem to go a lot more smoothly. I will tell you there were some problems with structure and chain of command, and where this was located, being located out at the airport, presented some significant problems at times. And then, as all issues, sometimes personnel presented some challenges. So it's not only important, I think, to have the right structure, it's also important to have the right personnel from the manager on down to who's actually doing the work. I can tell you that there was more pre-planning and pre-work done with this structure than there is now. However, I know Sergeant Wade Whitney and Lieutenant Dennis Huberty, as well as the Sheriff's Services Tech, Sherry Munson, they've done a great job of trying to reach out. I think in some cases our relationships are better than they were back then, but we did a lot more pre-planning and pre-work back then, just because we had extra staff that had the time to do it. They weren't tied up, with other issues.
So were these people dedicated to OES then? They didn't wear multiple hats?
At times, that operations captain had some jail and custody responsibilities. They were limited, though, and that was as we were shrinking. The operations lieutenant did have a few, as well as the sergeant and deputy. They worked marine safety part-time as well. So they did have some other responsibilities, but nowhere near to the extent it is now.
Yeah.
I can tell you the OES hazmat technicians had no other responsibilities. They were really doing a lot of the pre-work.
And do you recall what the budget was?
I'm not prepared today. I do have an idea of where it was at, but as I spoke to the county administrative officer about this, and I touched on a significant large number of grants, there was grant funding that was being carried over from year to year, which showed a lot of revenue that could be offset by an expense. And when those grants went away, that left the sheriff's office in a very, very difficult spot. We had to do an incredible amount of cleanup and some significant budget cuts at a bad time when we were also losing other revenue in the county. So it really impacted us in a negative way. We could do some research and come back to you and let you know. I believe Dennis Huberty and I were speaking earlier. He believed that county general fund contribution at this time was right around $250,000 to $300,000 per year. But let us firm that up.
Okay. I was just curious, general fund versus grant at this particular time. And then if this was a standalone department in and around this time, it was based at the airport.
It was.
And then as the county went through a not so good time, everything was kind of downsized and brought into the sheriff's department. Is that, as over years, as downsizing was happening and people were going away? And
yes, most of it was brought back into the sheriff's office, but there was a series of layoffs and bump backs and reductions and demotions that led up to that. But the OES didn't start working out of the main sheriff's office until we moved into the new building.
But it was under the sheriff's office. It was just located out at the airport.
Somebody.
Right. Initially, the OES was under admin, and it was in early
prior to 2000 or 99. It was under admin.
In the early 2000s, it was moved over to the sheriff's department.
And can you, today, when we talk about our funding, I'm assuming, if I recall right, most of it is grant funding. It's not coming from the general fund.
The grant funding is from Homeland Security and EMPG grants, but there is a larger contribution than there has been in the past few years, but it's still not at the level it was back prior to the recession.
At one point in time, Supervisor Pawnee, there was a significant general fund contribution that dwindled, went to zero, and you'll probably remember me being, displeased about that, as well as the previous sheriff, and then now they started to reinstitute some general fund dollars to offset. And again, it's offsetting staffing, and it's the staffing on that new org chart. And, to help you better understand, the reason there's a general fund contribution is that staff gets laid off without it. And we didn't want to do that, considering the importance of the emergency.
Well, I guess when I look at Office of Emergency Services, it does encompass a broad range of emergencies, whether it be public health, fire, the Sheriff's Department, et cetera. So as we look at organization, I guess, or reorganization, those are kinds of things I look at, is encompassing and making sure we have that broad range of what kinds of services we're talking about under Office of Emergency Services. And then, and also trying to cover all the dynamics of Office of Emergency Services. There's one thing to have that initial response, but, pre-planning is so important to look at who is out there, what resources are out there, and who can be called upon to task this and to take care of that. And so when there is that emergency, people are aware, like, okay, we have this group of people here that can handle animals, and we have this group of people here that can, deal with the public health aspect of it and that sort of thing. So I know with cuts, it's been extremely difficult to maintain, that level of service, and hopefully we can get back to something there in the middle and build.
I think that's what's so important about the functioning of the MAC, the Multi-Agency Coordinating Group. It brings them all into the room during an emergency. So depending upon which the immediate problem, that there's somebody that represents that agency to take charge of that. So even though the Sheriff's Office coordinates those meetings, houses OES, again, like I mentioned, if it's a public health emergency, they step up to the top and we're there to facilitate and coordinate. If it's a law emergency, when it's a fire, generally, the fire largely takes the lead, but we're handling the immediacy of the evacuation. And I think I hear you loud and clear about the recovery, and that's a significant piece to that. And I think you need staff trained and ready to do that, not somebody who's going to be distracted by other immediate emergencies that don't stop because there's a fire.
Right.
And that's where we're at now, unfortunately.
And then I see the...
I was just going to say, and that's why in our talking, we have talked about what it would look like with sworn and non-sworn personnel, at a non-sworn personnel at a higher level, too, that could handle those functions that the sworn personnel are not wanting to do, not their area of expertise. The other thing regarding the training that may be premature to bring up, but we are going to be having a major training next spring that is being funded and put on through FEMA and CalOES.
Something that I failed to mention early on, the California Office of Emergency Services has a regional staff person that has been working, working on our office prior to the Butte fire. There was a good working relationship there. We provided office space to them, so they would come in and spend time here, so there was a familiarity prior to the event. I believe she's largely working down here now, but we kind of mimic the California Office of Emergency Services, just at a much lower level, and then we have facilities in our office to communicate with them in the event of power outages and a disaster.
Yeah, that was my next thing is, locally we're taking care of these things here. We have the MAC group, but then there's this regional approach and state and so on and so forth, and keeping, involved in now those resources and keeping those relationships and communication and those kinds of things going too, because we, just can't be standalone. So, but I know with limited staffing, it's difficult to cover all those things.
So, first of all, I think you already know that I think the Sheriff's Office did a stellar job during the event. And each person that I worked with over there was doing everything they could, spending many, many hours beyond their call for their community. And so the issue is not that at all. Just want to make that clear. The issue is how do we free you up to be able to make sure that you can do that job, and also give maybe coordinate with other groups to even help with it, to make it more make it easier on everybody. It's not easy no matter what, but there's just whole big many situations out there, and when you're responding to what you're trained for, And a lot of times, if it's not something that's in the structure or that you're not used to doing, or maybe you're just tapped out with resources, then that's what you do. You just go to where you're used to going. And so it didn't take, maybe a day for you guys to start receiving outside folks to come in and help. You had 46 different agencies up there helping you with the response and with the with the evacuations, roadblocks, whatever else you needed. I don't pretend to know all of that. It was actually it was something that I was really proud to know that our sheriff's department actually handled that very, very well. I mean, it was unbelievable. And so for such that large of an event. So, but I started getting into it a little bit, taking notes, experiencing it actually, and as all of us did. And there is room for improvement. I would say that if you had full staff and you were able to coordinate have the funding and everything that you could have, it might have had a little different outcome. We could have probably been a little easier on people, but it is what it was. I think that my experience through the whole thing just told me that there were some gaps, and I would certainly like to fill those gaps. And I don't think it would be that difficult, really. I just think that we just need to be willing to do that. Communication is a big one for me, because as a supervisor, we start getting calls immediately. And not just a little bit of calls either, a lot of calls immediately. And it's everything from, gee, do we need to come up and evacuate animals, to, is there a shelter going to be opened? Where is it? What roads are closed? How big is it? What's going on, basically. People are very in tuned, especially now after the Butte fire, and they're very sensitive about anything that goes on. And so, so as a supervisor, when you're sitting there and you have a pretty major event happening, and you don't have any information, it's not a very good place to be. So, the other thing is I think the response was probably as good as it could have been. I don't care how many people you had, really. The one thing I did notice was a lack of communication between CAL FIRE and the Sheriff's Department. And I did not, it took me, my first meeting was there on Thursday at 3 o'clock at the MAC meeting. And I was just, when you came in, you were pretty upset. And I listened to you, and I looked and I understood. And to me, that was a pretty darn serious issue. We had a situation where people were not familiar with working with one another. And that was, I think since then, it's improved quite a bit. But at that moment, that was pretty crucial.
I have to interrupt you for a second on the familiarity issue. The issue on Thursday was the location that CAL FIRE was setting up in Amador County. The communication issue wasn't a lack of familiarity with staff. CAL FIRE comes and chairs our MAC meetings and attend thoroughly, so maybe I need some clarification on what communication issue. My displeasure was about the location that CAL FIRE decided to set up their base camp in another county.
Yeah. And I agreed with you. But also, I don't really want to get into too much of that detail.
Okay.
But that created a 2-hour delay, and for deployment, and that was so communication. I guess the bottom line is it's really important that we have something in place to be able to make sure that that kind of stuff doesn't happen anymore. I asked at one time for a live video feed, which I think we should be able to do no matter where we're going. We should have technology to do that. Considering, and I held my phone up and I said, look, I could Skype my relatives in Mexico right now. Why can't we get a live video feed from Plymouth? And to give you guys the tools that you needed to be able to make sure that your folks were going out there without that delay of information.
Chair, can I step in a little bit? I just want to, we're going back to what happened at the Butte Fire. And as tragic as it is what it was because of the lack of personnel that we had at the time. I wasn't in administration at that time, as you're very well aware of, but I was on the streets and I was dealing with what was going on the streets. The issue now is let's move forward, and I think I've told you this prior, that if we have the staffing, we can make this work. We can do what the Board of Supervisors want and what's good for the county. Going back and rehashing what happened in the Butte Fire is not what we need. What we need to do is look forward to repairing those problems. And the way we're going to be able to do that is to work together as a team, which is one thing I've kept saying all along, is if we work together as a team, we put something together so that we're all headed in the right direction. I understand that we had issues back in the Butte Fire. I know we had issues the other day with the burn up here off of the Willow Creek Fire. But those problems are still here because we haven't been able to change what we've got going on right now, which is to bring staffing levels back up to where we can take care of those problems. So we need to move forward in that aspect. Let's move forward to let us put a plan together so that we can bring it to the Board of Supervisors so that we have some options so that you can look at it and say, yes, this is what we need to do. Talking about what happened in the past is like talking about marijuana. Had we have banned marijuana 10 years ago, we might not be having the problem we're having. But that's not the way things are right now. So let's look at how we can fix this and get away from talking about what the problems were. We know what the problems are. Let's fix them.
I mean, I agree with you, but I don't think we know all the problems.
We never will. Every disaster is going to bring a different problem. I was in an earthquake in 1989, and my dad was down there in Santa Clara County, and I saw the problems that caused down there. Every disaster is going to be different because not every fire is going to be the same, not every flood is going to be the same. But we need to have the people that we can communicate with to make it all work together. We need to know who to talk to, and you have to give us the ability to put a plan together. Our plan is old. That plan that's up there ended in 2008. It's been gone. So let's put a plan back together and let's all work together so that we can make it work. But that's the key. We need to be able to work together to put this back. We can't, and I know you're not putting blame on the Sheriff Department, you're not putting blame on Cal Fire, but there are things that you wanted to see happen that didn't happen. Let's figure out how to make them happen.
I'm good with that.
Just for informational purposes, so the board and those in the audience understand, when a fire breaks out, we put somebody with an IC in the field. Ideally, they get in the truck with that person and drive around, so they're delivering real-time information back. I know I covered that a little bit during the MAC meetings during the fire. We will also ask for a representative from CAL FIRE in our MAC, and we send a sergeant and a lieutenant, respectively, over to Amador County to sit in there, again, to relay information between the fire in the field, the command post in Amador, and back into Calaveras. So that's in kind of our standard operating procedure, and that's for information at this point. I'll take any other questions, but I do have a suggestion coming up for the board.
In that particular instance, could it be that you have, we have quite a few local fire folks that have really good experience? Could it be that they could be the one relaying that information?
No.
Has to be a sheriff?
Yes.
Captain, we talked about solutions here, and I think I'd like to know what the problems are from all sides of this fence as we see them, so we can provide those solutions. And working together like the sheriff said. I know I had some very unique problems in District 3. We weren't involved in the fire, but ours were more detailed to evacuation, route, things of that sort. As we go forth with this plan, I'd like to make sure we address those problems in my district, but also for the rest of the county. I know there were some issues that I'm not aware of. There are issues that I am aware of. But I'd like to see a list of problems so we can find out what the solutions are.
That dovetails perfectly into my suggestion that I wanted to make to the board.
I didn't have this conversation.
But before we meet with these entities, we'd like to know essentially what your top 2 concerns are so that we can address those in our research with, as it relates to OES. So at whatever point the board's comfortable, we'd like to know what your top 2 concerns are that you want us to address and look into as we meet with these other agencies.
I'll go first. When we talk about evacuation order, can you give us just a rundown of where that order comes from and how it's carried out and who's responsible for it?
It comes from the recommendation of the fire agency based upon how fast they see the fire burning and the direction of travel. It comes to a senior administrative member of the sheriff's office, and the sheriff's office makes it would be at the rank of the captain or the sheriff that would make that decision. During the Butte fire, I made most of those decisions as far as evacuations. Butte fire was a little unique, as most of you recall. It was not a wind-driven fire. It was heavily affected by the drought, so it was not going from one direction clearly to another. It was spreading out in all different directions, which made it very difficult for us to get ahead of. And at one point in time, it burned so fast, as you know, there was a loss of life, and you know there was a loss of property where people didn't have a chance to get out. So as that information came into us, we started making evacuations. We completed them earlier to give people a time to collect their belongings and save their life, as opposed to waiting until it was too late. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, how those come down.
And I'm going to bring up one more issue in my district, was the fact that our traffic was just bottled up there at certain bottlenecks, one being Murphy's at the traffic signal. I know we did get a CHP officer there, and he was trying what he could. Those are one of the issues that we have, because I've got one way in and one way out in my district, is Highway 4 corridor. So if we could look at those traffic and get that traffic flowing. Most of our people were thinking about going over the hill. Well, we know that didn't work. A lot of people went to Bear Valley. Bear Valley couldn't handle them. So those are one of the things that I'd be interested in for District 3. And remember that we weren't involved in a fire. We weren't like District 2 and the folks that suffered all their loss. But our people needed to know how to get out of there and when to get out of there. And I guess we were very fortunate.
Supervisor Oliver, I have evacuation and traffic. Are those your?
That's correct.
I think for me, and this goes with the master plan, no matter what emergency it is, it's the communication and education. Communication to all levels and using all resources of communicating to people, whatever it is that people need to be doing. And then the education component. Most people aren't prepared for emergencies and different kinds of emergencies. So I think there's a whole, different levels of education in the plans that I've seen. And, there's certainly, you might say, the org chart of the communications and the communication tree and how that gets out. And the same with the education component, and primarily at this point, it's difficult to do most of that without the funding to be able to staff OES to the level that it needs to be, and probably having to start small and grow over time. But those are two components. I mean, what I saw, just a lot of the Butte fire, I've shared it. Going forward, I'd just like to see how we best can handle the communication and the educational component.
I will tell you that I agree with you entirely on the education component of it. When I looked at other counties' OES websites as we started this, I noticed there was a lot more pre-emergency information on there than we currently have on our website. That's something that won't cost a lot of staff time. I mean, the actual training. The one difficulty we do run into when it comes to that is nobody bothers to take a look at that until the event is occurring.
Right.
That's one thing I learned from the Loma Prieta earthquake and what little studying I've done from that and what I've heard is nobody bothers to ever open that webpage. Or, I mean, I shouldn't say nobody. There are some very good citizen groups that take that seriously, but that's such a small percentage of the population, and that's not who the elected officials hear from at the, at the time of an emergency.
It's a whole,
So driving that out is important. I agree.
a lot of community events and outreach and repeated over and over and over and over again.
It works great with the schools because you have a hostage audience. They can't escape. But for your general citizen, a lot of people want to put emergencies at the back of their mind, and they're trying to live their life, and it's the last thing they want to spend time on. So.
And looking at, how to reach someone that's homebound and doesn't have internet access, how to reach an elderly person who, may not be able to get out of their home. Or doesn't leave their home much, certainly the school system is good. And then, workplace, we have a tremendous amount of opportunities within workplaces to try to help educate people. But it's continuous, and I agree, people wait for the very last minute and, want to go to a website and the power's down. So what are you going to do? I think one of the things that's beneficial is our telecommunication system we have in place about notifying people of certain situations. I know with the Willow Fire, got it through Nexel, got it through the phone system, and of course, if you believe everything on Facebook, you were probably headed in the wrong direction if you paid attention to Facebook. But, if there's a presence there that people are looking towards, being the good source of information, that's helpful.
So I agree with everything what you guys are talking about, and I think that's the more the kind of details of the plan and the action. So what I'd like to know when you talk to these other counties is what are the other counties as far as the structure goes, and then what do they do for funding? Those are my two. Like are they a standalone OES office that is like any other standalone department? Are they part of the sheriff's department? Are they, et cetera on that? And has it been, like all the things we're talking about here, evacuation plans, communication, education, as the structure and funding that they have, has that really helped them in being able to be successful during the emergency? Just kind of, is what you're doing really working? Or based on your experience in your structure, are there changes that you would make to your own structure if you could? That kind of like examining their own success and failure, if you can get to that level of communication with them, and it's very difficult, I think. And then dealing with the fact that we don't have a lot of money to put in whatever we put into place, how can we go outside of our general fund and get funding, more funding to put those in place? So that was my priority.
I think it's important that the communication actually was number one, I think, in my experience. And also making sure that the whole community's involved. So you have your nonprofits, fire, and even your water districts. There was issues with that, so on and so forth. Plus, it doesn't just stop after the response; it just continues on. The CLAC was another important part of the process, and then also there were people camped out all over the place, and making sure they were taken care of too. And the only way you can do that really is by involving, all the groups out there that you could possibly get in. You have seniors that couldn't find any location to even stay because we had so many responders that were here that they pretty much took up every hotel space, and so. We also engaged. There was a lot of people that got engaged to help out with that too. So and then also when you get to this fire in particular, you have we got banged on pretty good from FEMA and OES. They're kind of used to doing things their way, you know, and sometimes a county like ours might be a little bit unique and different, and so we have to be able to know how to get out of them what we need to get out of them for our benefit. That was a question I kept asking the whole time, and it's a pretty hard one to get answered, actually. So that's why we have to have that relationship with them before an event, so that we know what the processes are. And one of them was funding. So, you know, to get reimbursed for the types of funding that we can get funding for, to know what we can go after for support. But not only that, but we have to be able to keep the correct records to be able to get the return on it. That was something that we never dealt with before. So it's really hard for I think all of us to deal with that. So the process is really important. That's why I think that it's great that I think it needs to be in the sheriff's OES or Office of Emergency up there, Emergency Operating Center. And right now, even still, we could be having meetings up there. One thing I noticed right after the MAC closed, there was 2 or 3 locations that were leased for different reasons, and so it became a recovery that moved away from the MAC or from the OES. I think the OES should be involved from the beginning to the end, because the OES should be the agency that works in total for the total event, in my opinion. Okay, because it's seamless that way. Otherwise, things get lost in the shuffle. So, and there's even now we have tree mortality going on. That's a state of emergency. We have the burn tree stuff. Okay, that's a state of emergency. If we had an OES director, they would be involved with this right now, all of it, and it would be consistent, because we would already have the relationship with who we need to have a relationship with. So, that's kind of how I feel that our OES should be, is it overall encompassing the whole thing. I mentioned before that I felt like the OES director should work for the Board of Supervisors. And the reason I felt that way is because the Board of Supervisors is the conduit between the sheriff, the county, and the people. We connect with all of them. And when the county's working on their stuff and the sheriff is working on their stuff, there's some area in there that needs to be also worked on. And so that's why I felt that it should be a standalone, especially in this event. Now, I know that most OES groups either work with the sheriff or admin through the state. But I could tell you that I believe it was the Valley Fire where the OES director lost his job pretty early in the mix. And for whatever reason, I didn't look into it. But when you have an event this size, it actually, I think, tends to put a little bit more on. It's a whole different situation. And so if you're going to go out and research these groups, these OES, where they are, I would suggest that you find one with events this size. Because this county is primed for another one, especially with all the tree mortality we've got going right now. So that's my only concern. It's not about who rules what. I don't really give a crap about that. I actually wish that it would have been a little easier thing on all of us, and it would have been really nice for the board to receive information and just kind of stay there, stand by, and be asked to support on some things. It didn't happen that way, and so for me, that would be my goal, is to make sure that in the future, when we do have an event like that, that we are just informed and then ask for support rather than have to become a part of it. Not that I did, it's okay to become a part of it, but at the request. So.
And if I might suggest to the board one other aspect, and that's training. Training not only for the sheriff staff, because I know they do it all the time, but training for the other county departments, because we've had a turnover of department heads over the last 10 years, and a lot of the department heads that were here during the Butte fire had never been here before, for the prior fires or emergencies that we had. So I think if that's an ongoing training, especially as staff changes, that would be a real benefit if the board want to consider that a priority as well.
We're going to have always changes.
That's why training is important.
I do have one more question, Chair, and I just was made aware of this just last week. On the recovery and reimbursement from FEMA and OES, did the Sheriff's Department get their billed recovery amounts?
Yes.
And I bring this up because in my district, and if it's past fire, they actually submitted a claim for $78,000 roughly. And by the time it was over, FEMA gave them a check for $8,600 and said that's it. So is there a problem in the reporting?
And that's probably something that can be looked at. I know the sheriff's office, from what I heard, did a really excellent job at reporting.
The Everett's Pass Fire District probably submitted a claim separately from the county because they are their own entity, as were other fire districts. Okay. So however they claimed or however they supported or documented those costs would have been up to them. I know that our auditor controller is pretty diligent about going through and seeking reimbursement. So if they have questions, they may want to seek some assistance from her, because all the district's monies are housed
So
through our
all
county.
those claims didn't go through the county?
Not for the fire districts.
They were actually submitted from each individual fire district to FEMA.
That would be correct.
And each one of them probably a little bit different. And that's why I think it's really important to have it all consistent. And the OES director position can make sure that happens. And, there may have been an opportunity there if they were consistent of it. Maybe if they were, and I don't know for sure, but maybe if they were consistent at this, they could have had a bigger return if there's a certain process for it.
I believe it was early November, there was a meeting that was held here in the board chambers for all groups that were going to or thought they might submit claims to FEMA and Cal OES for costs for the fires. And we had somebody from Cal OES FEMA here that were providing that information, that said to arrange a kickoff meeting with them so that they could discuss their particular needs and the follow-through and the reporting requirements.
And I was here at that meeting as well, and that's a good point. And like Sheriff DiBasilio said, let's move forward on this. So moving forward, if we were able to know how to identify those things on the forefront that we could get reimbursed for, then it may make you do your business a little bit different to make sure that you're qualified. And so, when you have 12 different groups doing things differently, if we were able to coordinate that in such a way to where, look, here it is, we know what we need to do now, and everybody can work together on it, then I think we can get a better return.
If I could address a couple of the comments that were made briefly. One of the things, I guess I have the fortune of being present during the meetings, almost every, the list of questions you guys have those are the questions we're going to ask, and we'll research that thoroughly and report back to you. But post that polling comment, all of the issues you have spoken about, those are all covered during the MAC. They're all covered during the county fire chiefs meeting. The fire departments have ample opportunity to reach out to not only Calaveras OES, but state OES to address any funding issues or problems that related as a result of the fire. I think, unfortunately, the board doesn't attend the meetings as frequently as we do, so I think you're missing a lot of the information and a lot of the communication that does, in fact, occur. I'm sure you hear complaints, but you have to understand, too, the sheriff's office does not control the way with which an independent fire district chooses to handle its billing or chooses to handle its operations. We can only make recommendations and explain to them the ramifications. Same thing kind of goes with other county department heads. We utilize the CAO's office for those issues. And can I get to 2 points?
Can I
Absolutely.
make a comment on that? One of the issues, though, and I think if we did have a fully functioning OES, fully funded one, that they could help, because these small fire districts don't have the administrative staff to really get into the nitty-gritty and follow up it and really navigate through the bureaucracy that's necessary. So I think that's part of what the problem is. It's not them not wanting to do it, they just don't have the staffing capacity to do it. And I think if you had a fully functioning OES, then you may have those folks there to help with that bureaucracy interface.
Okay. I'll agree with you there, but I saw our staff going to extreme lengths, handing people pieces of paper, saying, sign here, it's done for you, and there was still some pushback. So I
think it's probably an example of just where, they were stretching themselves,
Sure.
already.
And I'll close this out with a terrible analogy, but, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force him to drink, and we ran into that several times throughout this emergency. And there was some staff in our office that in particular went overboard trying to help people, and they just, for whatever reason, didn't want to listen. I'm not saying anything about your particular districts. I don't even know which fire agency you're speaking of. Supervisor Edson, can I get 2 areas of qualification? You stated you got banged on by FEMA and OES, and you wanted to know what you could get out from them specifically, and I didn't catch exactly what you meant there.
So FEMA and OES was here to help us. That's what they were here for. They said that many times. And we've never been through an event like this. So I didn't know the questions to ask them. And so what I was asking them, well, tell me, you've been through this before, let me know the questions to ask so we can get your help out of it. And that's what I was referring to.
So I think board training is definitely in order at a minimum.
Yeah,
I agree.
we all should be trained. Did you? And you're aware of the FEMA training next in the spring? Is that going to be open to also to some of the nonprofits?
I know there was a cap on the number. Sergeant Wade Whitney was coordinating with somebody back on the East Coast as it relates to that training. I don't know what the cap is, and I don't have the attendee or invitee list with me. I don't know if Lieutenant Liberty.
It was 65 people.
And that was 75 seats that they can do, and that increases the number of the facilitators also. So that's what Sergeant Whitney's doing currently, is getting a head count to determine the department heads and their auxiliary staff is going to take up most of the seats. That's going to reduce the number of your non-bonds. If there's more openings, there will be more invitations to the community. But we are limited by seats and staffing. It's kind of
You mentioned the Valley Fire as well. I can tell you I'm familiar with what went on there to a certain extent. Yeah, there was some issues there that they have just recently kind of began fixing. Unfortunately, it happened a day or two before they had their most recent fire. I don't know if I mentioned this to you in the past or not, but my brother is the undersheriff of Lake County, so I did get quite.
So you communicate with them.
Well, both of our counties were on fire at the same time, so to speak. So there was, yeah.
Wow. Okay. And so I still maintain that that in an event like this one, emergency, when there's a state of emergency at least, or any emergency, I think it's great that we have a facility that houses OES, but I still believe that OES director needs to be separated or connected with all of us. So connected with the admin, connected with the sheriff, and connected with the board. And so I don't know if the answer is working for the board, because actually most people are supposed to work for the board. I think that's the way county government works. But I felt like it was something that was pretty easy for me to identify at that moment, at that time, and I feel the same right now. Really, that the OES director should work for the board as a separate unit, and then work with admin and the sheriff's office equally, so that they can manage the events, the whole event. Just my opinion. And you already know that, Anna.
I'd like to see a study group. And is there a timeline we can look at for that?
I believe Captain Macedo said the end of October.
And I will tell you, that's going to be a little bit of a push for us, okay, with everything else that's going on, but we're going to try. We've already done some pre-work, but it's going to require a little bit of travel. I want to actually look and be able to kind of touch what they do, and I know the other staff that's involved. Everybody has a role, so I'd like everybody to be available to, answer questions and just getting everybody's calendar on board and getting that scheduled.
That'd be great. Thank you, Captain.
I think not the end of October, maybe the beginning of November, because I too will be out of the area at the end of October.
I'll be out of the area. And then in November, December.
The only thing I would ask is that maybe we can fix a little communication issue, because information sometimes is just the information. Sometimes is all we need.
Can I make a suggestion? The board has the option to choose who they contact, but when a fire breaks out or a major emergency within your respective district, if you would either get with the county administrative officer or myself and let me know where you're going to be and what phone number you're going to be at, I can provide you with information that you could submit to all 5 of you. Sometimes I'm actually managing things at the same time, and I have to balance whether to make a phone call or to a board member or deal with staff or make a decision that they need. So that would really help me and really help the sheriff's office if you could decide amongst yourselves either to call the chair or to call the CAO and say this is where I'm going to be, and then as far as I can disseminate information to one of you who can disseminate it back, or the sheriff back to the 5 of you. That way it'll cut down the numbers of calls we have to make, and then we can brief you and that person can relay the information. Sometimes we don't call you immediately because we know you're going to have questions and we don't have answers. And also there's times we're actually actively making staffing and evacuation decisions, so you're just going to have to bear with us that we're trying to call you at the best time when we have the right amount of information and hopefully the questions you're going to ask and the answers to those. Excuse me.
So, and I agree with you. I personally don't think it should go to the board chair because I cannot communicate with the rest of the board on the Brown Act. I'd like maybe the OES director would be the contact person, and then that OES director can disseminate it out.
Supervisor Edson, the OES director is actively involved in managing the emergency. We're looking for somebody outside that circle.
Council, can we actually do that? What's the procedure, do you know?
It can't be me, I can tell you that.
I know.
It should go to Shirley, I think. I think
That's how it was done in the past, but that's the decision of the board.
Traditionally, how it has been handled.
Okay. All we know.
I think that's the way it should be.
Yeah, if you're comfortable with that.
Yeah, Captain Macedo has all my phone numbers, homework, and so.
Okay.
Good. Before any quick snake, buddy.
With regards to the claiming, there was a question on claiming. We early on made sure that we communicated with the districts that were responding to this, that were going to be involved in this, and we told them right away to document. I said it in MAC meetings. I had meetings with people. I sent memos out. We sent emails out. We communicated every possible way, same way as we did here locally with our departments. You have to document everything because if it did go to a presidential declaration, the requirements were going to be extremely stringent. We did make sure that all of the entities understood that they were going to have to claim on their own, but there are just hoops that you have to jump through in order to get that claim. Also, I think what a lot of the districts didn't quite understand is there's that 24-hour window that the funding doesn't cover. And so if that first 24 hours was all that you responded to, you're not getting, that's shaved off your claim. So that was also, a same issue that we had as well, but that's just the rule of the funding. So we did communicate as much as possible. Again, I think it goes back to, we'll look at different educational opportunities that we can have outreach with these districts to make sure that they understand going forward what they need to do during an emergency. But I did try to make sure from day one that we communicated with every single one of them. They knew, we told them kind of over document and over collect your information just in case. So we did do that. If there's districts that didn't do that, there's not really anything I can do. It's the same issue we had here with departments. If departments didn't do it because they said we're too busy, we can't document it, those will probably be the expenses that are thrown out.
Okay, I'll do further research. And I'll do some further research, see if I can get better information.
I would do further research, and FEMA is very specific on documentation. So if they had equipment that was damaged, they had to have photographic documentation about the damage to verify that it was in fact from that fire. So there's a lot of documentation requirements that everybody had to follow.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Lieutenant Huberty reminded me of one thing that I failed to mention. Our staff goes to Calaveras quarterly, where we have region meetings and statewide meetings, so they're briefed on threats and issues, and there's names to faces so that when events occur, and they do provide training to staff, so I failed to mention that. And the other thing, too, it really doesn't matter what type of event, even when we have a small standoff in a house, and we do this for the large fires, we have a lessons learned debriefing. We do it at a small scale and a large scale after almost every event. Sometimes it's right at the back of a car in a street corner. Sometimes it's much larger in a building to try and go over issues where we think we could make improvements, and then we also address any staff or personnel issues we had at that time. So the Sheriff's Office is really good at doing that, and we do utilize that with other agencies. Obviously, the bigger the event, the longer it takes for us sometimes to debrief those before it gets started or before we're able to actually go, contact all the individuals involved. And lastly, I do want to leave the board with this. I think most of you already know this. There's always going to be complaints when you have a catastrophic event. There's always going to be people's nerves, people rattled, people upset about certain things. Again, I mentioned I have the fortunate ability to have been through quite a few, even large fires that have damaged homes before, and the floods in '97. And we do take those complaints into account, and we look into those, and we determine if there is, something we can do to fix that. I will agree communication is one of the biggest complaints regardless of the event. It's the biggest complaint we get internally. It's the biggest complaint we get externally. And there's times when we specifically hold back communicating with people, and so we don't push out wrong information, because that is the worst thing you can do. And I've had a front row seat to our office pushing something out years ago that was inaccurate, and you don't want to do that. So please keep all those things and take them into consideration when you're calling, asking for information, that, we're trying to juggle, assignments, staff responsibilities, and making sure we've got, concrete facts, that we can relate to you, because the last thing we want to do is give you wrong information and have you deliver it back out to your constituents.
Thank you, Captain.
Any public comments?
Good afternoon, House of Gallup Taxpayer Association. It's pretty complex, and you really have our appreciation in trying to find solutions. We had a board meeting today, and we reviewed some of the issues that you're reviewing here now. And one of the things that we recommend is to do a study session like it's being started now, but also include the auditor and fire people, and then other agencies that are involved in emergencies. And with that study session, try to hammer out the need and nature of communication. We know we need to have communication to property owners about fire safety and how to make their property more fireproof. There may be other things that are happening that not involve fire, but something else. It could be hazardous materials. It could be trees. Anyway, there's a lot of things under the area of communication. But it seemed like the OES officer needs to be the expert and the focal point for that. Communication during an event seems like, rather than having to call a particular supervisor where something's happening, the best form, we think the best form of communication is email to all supervisors, because the supervisor by themselves do not have power. They want to respond to their own constituents with up-to-date information. But if the information is known and accurate, it could be emailed to all the supervisors, because there may be other supervisors that are involved with it as well. So it's not like the supervisor is going to be in charge of an event. It's not the case at all. The supervisor's role is just communication, but the supervisor's most important role is policy setting. Setting policy is in creating what's to be created, and this is very important, which also raises the question of who the supervisor should be that do this. We are likely to have a dramatic change in the board, and the new board members may not see things the same way.
30 seconds.
So between now and then, we think that as much study as possible go into it. The sheriff should, the Office of Emergency Services should probably be under the sheriff. It makes sense for it to be under the sheriff, but it should be constructed by the board under policymaking abilities like you have now. Funding is also a very important part, and the auditor has indicated that we could really lose money if we don't document things properly. Here again, the Office of Emergency Service can really nail that down and help. And I think that's my 30 seconds, so thank you.
Good afternoon. A very interesting discussion. I come to you from a perspective of over 20 years ago now, as one of the last trainers for the last major coordinated training for interagency in Calaveras County called the Goliath Incident, where we brought together not just fire agencies here in the county, but fire agencies through Stanislaus, Tuolumne, San Joaquin. They were all here. And not only the fire, but it was the medical. It was the volunteers. Because what we found, for instance, from the old Gulch fire is that the fairgrounds became the immediate command center for CEF at the time. And it still is today to some degree. You find that they're going to use that facility almost every chance they get. We didn't have, Supervisor Oliveira, the issue of Murphy's back during the old Gulch. If you recall, we staged a lot of our equipment up at Avery in the open field up there. Right. And when that became untenable because of the potential, we moved on up to Big Trees Village. But at all of that time, there was a constant effort by everyone to not create situations where the public was, in essence, overlapping where we might land with our resources. So what I want to really remind you is that ICS recovery really starts with that first decision, because that first decision sets the stage of how you're going to recover as you move forward throughout that incident. Volunteers play a big role in this thing, and they can be a help and they can be a hazard. It just depends on what type of an incident command system and structure you have in place. So they should definitely be involved in whatever the logistics are as you go forward with this decision. OES coordinator is a critical part of what we do. We don't always need them, but when we need them, they're going to be the big difference in how well we can handle the incident. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Rosemary Wilson. I'm glad you had this today. When I looked at the county's brief summary of why you were meeting, it seemed to be very apologetic because they had only had from about middle of August to get this together. I found that disappointing. I found it disappointing because the fire started on September the 9th, did it not? So I think that the sheriffs, the county as a whole should have had more information to share with you today rather than to say, well, we're going to go off and start looking. I also found it worrisome that the sheriff and the officer that spoke seemed to be in control of the board instead of perhaps it being a free flow of information. I say that insofar as there was the talk that there was no need to go through what had and hadn't happened during the Butte fire, because that was past history, where you can learn a lot from going through what you had experienced during that particular fire, whether it be in District 2, 1, 3, 4, or 5, whether it be a fire or whether it be a terror attack or whatever, you can still learn from that. As far as the chart there being from 2008, 2009, I think that says enough in itself. What, 7, 8 or more years since that was the case. The other point, if we are to have a working group meeting to really research and brainstorm and troubleshoot various issues within, that arose from the Butte fire, also in terms of the Office of Emergency Services, you don't foster that by saying to the Board of Supervisors, let me have your 2 top concerns.
15 seconds.
You don't do that. It should be far more open. You should be able to present whatever so-called crazy ideas you have, and between you on a more level pegging, you could perhaps find new and innovative ways of dealing with it.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
Hi, Kathy Topol, Common Ground Senior Services. Shirley, first of all, I have a question. I believe she's housed in public health. Is there an OES officer in public health? There's a woman, I can't remember her name, with long hair. I think she's out of public health, but I thought she was the OES.
No, she's not part of OES.
She's not part of OES.
She's in public health dealing with preparation for pandemic-type issues, but she is not a member of OES.
Gotcha. Okay. As most of you know, Common Ground came before you and asked for funding to help house frail individuals that could not stay in shelters. I've also reported that we had assisted 74 either frail or disabled individuals with either food, shelter, transportation. 8 of those clients are still out of county in facilities. The reason they're in facilities is, number one, either their family members decided not to rebuild, and number two, we have no facilities in our county that will accept Medi-Cal. And these are very frail, poor people. So they are down either in Stockton, we have one in Merced, we have one that went to Riverside. So those are people that got displaced from the fire. One of the things that I really was just so frustrated with was trying to help these people is that within 10 days of the fire, we got them in right away, we got them into rooms right away, but then they were limited because of the fact Cal Fire and PG&E took up all our hotel rooms. And so I brought this up last week at a town hall meeting, and I think his name is Mario Hernandez, educated me. In their union contract, it's cheaper for them to stay in hotel rooms than it is to set up a tent. And so their union contract puts them in hotel rooms. One of the suggestions he gave me, genius as far as I'm concerned, Cal Fire, and I believe PG&E also, they have an $89 government rate that they guarantee these hotels. And so they will take them. If the county could do something like that in their OES plan and make it $90 a night, we're $1 above what the government rate is going to pay, but we've got room to put our people so they're not being pushed out of county.
30 seconds.
And so I would just like you to consider that when you create your OES plan. Thanks.
Any other public comments? All right, bring it back to the board. Comments? No? Well,
I'll just say thanks to the Sheriff's Department, and I think it is incumbent upon the us board members, if we want to, it's in the agenda item, if we want to discuss anything that's within the realm of the agenda, then we can discuss it. So it's really our prerogative, and the sheriff, they told us what they thought, and we disagreed like we do sometimes. We could have, done what we wanted. But I think in this case, I got what I'm after, and that is it's moving forward. We're starting the discussion. We kind of got some background. Hopefully within this next few months, we can get even more details and eventually, have a fuller functioning OES for when the next emergency comes. So I'm happy with this start. It's just how things happen. It takes time to work through making changes. And so I thank the Sheriff's Department and the admin for helping with this.
Okay. And I agree. I think we need to find solutions. We have kind of a conflicting code. It doesn't really match with our EOP. You have 2.17, which is an old county code, which I actually agree with still. So I think there's some work that needs to be done around the resolutions. But I also, when you talked about how, you can't, the OES is just too busy during an event to send out a report or to somebody. I would say that probably you feel that way right now because you guys have been squeezed so darn hard over the past years. You're using every person, including your OES director, to respond in any way they can. And I feel that that OES director, if we had one that was independent of that and just managing it, would have the resources to be able to have that communications that are available, to be able to make it free. There would be time there for, as part of their process, to be able to make those communications decisions. Right now, it's very difficult. I'm absolutely sure. Because, like you said, Captain Macedo, you were on the front line making decisions. Even your OES director was probably working somewhere in that capacity, making decisions for evacuations or whatever it is. But I would say that, if we get to a place where we have an OES that can not have to have those responsibilities, but to manage that, it'll be a little different story. So, I still think communications need to come from the OES director. And that's all I have. Thank you for bringing this forward. Look forward to continuing this as we move forward, and I'm sure we can come up with some really good solutions. Okay? Is that it? Thank you.